Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Appreciated that. Enjoyed that. Kind of felt like we were around a campfire, didn't it? At camp. That was great. Really enjoyed that. Just fantastic music, obviously, in this church. It really is. And it adds such a blessing to the worship services. It is the truth. Yes, I know. It is. It's fantastic. Well, let's say a word of prayer before we begin. Father, come be with us. I just pray that your Spirit will be here as I speak and as others listen. Touch our hearts with what you want us to hear. Help us to become who you want us to be. And we ask this because of Jesus. Amen. So I want you to take a look at verse 2 again. There in Genesis chapter 1. Verse 2. Verse 2, and it says, the earth was without form and void. I've never really thought about that much, to be honest with you. I've never thought about that. It says without form and it was void. It is. But I heard a presentation, it's been many, many years ago, but actually Dr. Davidson from the seminary. And he's pointed something out about this. Those two words mean unformed and unfilled. So the earth was unformed and unfilled, and then as God began the process of creation, he follows that pattern. He forms and then he fills. And again, thank you to Dr. Davidson. I had never thought about this, but if you look at the days of creation, if you look at those days of creation, and you split them in half. So you have 1 through 3, and then 4 through 6. It follows that pattern. Day 1, what was created? Light. What was created on day 2? The atmosphere, right? He separates the air from the water. The atmosphere, if you will. And then on day 3, what was created? Land. Right? Your land appears. So, let's go up to day 4. What was created on day 4 opposite of light? Sun, moon, and stars. Interesting. So he forms the light, and then he fills it with the sun, moon, and stars. Day 2, what was created? The atmosphere. Day 5, what was created? Fish and birds. So he creates the air and the water, then he fills it with the birds and the fish. Day 3, what was created? Land. Day 6, what was created? Animals and man, right? So he creates the land and then he fills it with the animals and man. It's kind of interesting. I thought about that, and I began to think that principle must apply in many ways in the way that God deals with us as humans. Now, you also see that pattern in the creation of man, don't you? Talk to me. Tell me, how did God create man? Did he speak man into existence? No. He formed him from what? From dirt. And then what? Filled him with the breath of life. So formed him with dirt, filled him with the breath of life. And you see this principle of formed and filled. He forms and then he fills. I want you to take a look at Matthew chapter 9, because Jesus actually uses this principle in this illustration as well. So the first gospel, Matthew, we're going to look at chapter 9, and we're going to look at verse 17. Verse 17 to chapter 9 of Matthew, it says, "Nor do they put new wine into old wineskins, or else the wineskins break. The wine is spilled and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved." So Jesus uses this same principle, right? You have to form it first. You have to have the wineskin. Got to have the properly formed wineskin. Then you fill it with the wine. I want you to kind of take a look at some of the healing examples in Matthew 9 as well. Take a look there. Help me out. What are some of the stories here, some of the healing stories in Matthew 9? Okay, so this ruler that comes and says, "Hey, my daughter is dead. Can you come raise her to life?" And then what happens on the way? There's a story on the way to heal, or actually to raise to life, this little girl. What happens? The woman with the issue, right? Blood. And what does she do? She touches the hem of his garment. Then when he gets to the location where the little girl is, what kind of a reception does he meet? When he goes and he tells them, and what does he say first? What's his proclamation about the girl? She's asleep, right? And then what's their response? They laugh at him. They mock it, right? They mock it. And then when he goes to heal her, does he invite them in with him? No, he says, "All right, guys, move out." Do you see any sense of forming and filling in those stories of the healings? Think. As the late Dr. Leslie Harding said, think. It's neither painful nor fatal. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, I would say that he formed a positive atmosphere by getting rid of the negativity, all the people that were laughing him in scorn. Now the parents, they had hope and they had faith. I mean, they were the ones that wanted him there. So he formed a positive atmosphere. And he filled it with his spirit.
Filled it with life, right? Yeah. No, I think so. I think you can see there he had to form the proper atmosphere. He had to form the proper environment for this healing, this pretty amazing thing. It's beyond a healing. You're actually raising someone back to life. You're actually bringing them back to life. I think also the formation of need is one of the things that I would see in probably both the father and the woman. And probably in many of these cases, there was a formation of need. These people felt such a desperate need. And then when they had that need, God could fill that need with his presence, with his healing, with his peace, whatever it might be. I want to read some verses. Let's read some verses about forming and about filling. I think it is a blessing to think about these things. Go to Exodus. Actually, let's start in Psalm chapter 139. Psalm chapter 139. And you probably will recognize this when you see it. Chapter 139 of Psalms, and we're going to look at verse 13. Verse 13, it says, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb." So you see, God formed us right from the get-go, right? He's forming us. He's forming us from the get-go. Take a look at 2 Kings 19 and 25. 2 Kings chapter 19 and verse 25. Second Kings 19:25 says, "Did you not hear long ago how I made it? from ancient times that I formed it. Now I have brought it to pass that you should be for crushing fortified cities and heaps of ruins. Now this obviously sets in the context of a bigger story, but he says, look, I formed it and then I brought it to pass. Now, you can also see this then apparently in prophecy. Prophecy is a process of forming and then filling. He forms the prophecy, he makes a declaration. That declaration may not come into reality right at that moment. It may have a certain time. And when that time is fulfilled, then that thing gets filled. He forms it and he fills it in prophecy. Take a look at Galatians 4 and 19. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 19. My little children, for whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you. In fact, we kind of talked about this at Sabbath school this morning, didn't we? We concluded as we talked about the Sabbath school lesson, and then we kind of concluded that God is trying to create in us an attitude and a spirit that loves the world. And when we say the world, we're talking about the people in the world, the way that he loves it, to develop the same attitude and spirit that he has toward others. Take a look at Exodus chapter 28. Exodus chapter 28. You know, I'm going to add something, there's a little bit of a side light. But you know, this role, the role of pastor, is one that we use a particular term for, don't we? What is it? Called. That's what I'm thinking. I know you don't necessarily know what vein my mind's running in. Called, right? You're supposed to be called to be a pastor. That's the term. I mean, if a pastor got up and said, you know, knocks his headgear off. If I, you know, like I say, any pastor gets up and says, you know, I thought it'd be kind of a good way to make some money. You know, you can hang out with people and stuff like that. What would you think of a pastor like that? Right? But let me ask you this. If that's inappropriate for a pastor, is it appropriate for a plumber? An attorney? A physician? A computer scientist? I'm not sure of some of maybe the details. An IT person? Think of any profession that exists. A janitor. Is it okay for them? Yes. You know, something, let me say, I do think God calls every individual to a specific spot in life, and then he fills them. If you so follow, he will fill you with his spirit so that you can serve his purpose in whatever role he's called you to. And here's my evidence for that. Let's take a look at Exodus chapter 28 and verse 3. We're going to look at several passages here in Exodus, but Exodus 28 and verse 3, it says, "So you shall speak to all who are gifted artisans, whom I have filled with" what? "The spirit of wisdom, that they may make Aaron's garments to consecrate him, that he may minister to me as priest." You realize the people that made Aaron's garments were filled with God's Spirit. All right, take a look at chapter 31 and verse 3. Exodus 31 and verse 3. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship. Now, who's this talking about? Bezalel. He was one of the craftsmen for the sanctuary. Take a look at chapter 35 and verse 35. So go to Exodus chapter 35 and verse 35. It says, he has filled them with skill to do all manner of work of the engraver and the designer and the tapestry maker in blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and fine linen, and of the weaver, those who do every work, and those who design artistic works. And again, if you look at that, he's talking about Aholiab, one of the craftsmen on the sanctuary. God intends for all of us to be formed as he wants us to be and to be formed, and then he will fill us. I want to kind of go through some examples because I want you to kind of think this through a little bit, process it through. What about Noah? Can you think about this? Did God maybe work in a forming and a filling process with Noah? And if so, and it may not seem clear-cut textbook, but I'm just going to challenge you. Think about the story of Noah. Do you see that process at work? And maybe not. Built the ark, he formed the ark and filled it. Yeah, I think that's a pretty simple one too, right? Yeah, and maybe even in his own experience, in the formation, in which we may not be fully aware of, is the formation of Noah in his own spiritual experience. Go ahead, Glenn.
Great hope, because for 600 years, Noah had had a different profession. Nobody had ever built a boat that I know of. I mean, maybe they did on lakes, who knows? I'm sure there must have been lakes over rivers. But here suddenly is a man that God gave him a plan and he did it. And so it makes me feel better that at 24, Noah didn't have to know what he was going to do. He was just open to what God laid on him.
Nice. That's good. It's a good observation, Glenn. Yeah, just like, hey, God may surprise you. Then, in other words, he might do something that might shock you a little bit. Okay, yeah. Anybody else? How about Abraham? How about Abraham? Anything there that you can see maybe in the forming and the filling process? You know, I'll just share a thought that I've had about Abraham is I always find it fascinating when we think of Abraham and we think of the act that he committed with Isaac and how incredible that is. And I think we all marvel at that, especially those of us as parents, right? We just marvel at that. Wow, what? I mean, and yet, I think, would Abraham have done that 20 years earlier, 25 years earlier? And I realize this is speculation, I get that, but I can't help but wonder. And the reason that I'm doubtful that he would have is that when he went into Egypt, what did he do with explaining his wife Sarah? Right? Yeah, he did it more than once too, didn't he? He said, "Oh, no, it's my sister." So you go, wow, he didn't have enough faith to do that. Would he have been able to sacrifice his own son at that point? I don't know. I'm skeptical. He didn't have a son, you're right. What about the whole situation with Hagar? he's starting to get a little antsy, which we all do as humans, right? We get antsy with the promise that God had made. Now, God had made this promise. God formed the promise, but he hadn't filled it yet, had he? And therein maybe lies another thing that we need to remember. Certainly, I think we talk about God's timing. If God is in the process of forming, let's let him finish forming and then decide when it's time to fill. But Abraham with Hagar, I don't know. I don't know that he would have passed the test that happened then at that point in his life. There need to be some formation. How about Jacob? Now, let me point this out regarding Jacob. Do you think that the forming and the filling process is a process that takes place early in life and only early in life? How long may that process go on in a person's life? What? Their whole life? Oh, okay. Well, no, you guys, I agree with you guys. You guys are all right. I'll buy that. I like that too. In fact, I want you to think a little bit about Jacob. Do you know how old Jacob was when he had to run from his brother to head into another country? If you look at the artist's rendition, how old is Jacob in those pictures? Looks pretty young, doesn't he? He looks like he's in his early 20s, you know? But do you know how old he was? 77 years old. 77-year-old mama's boy. That's what he was. That was Jacob. Jacob was a mama's boy. Yeah, there you go. That's right. He was. Esau was daddy's boy. Jacob was mama's boy. But he was 77 years old. But he needed something. And even that was not the final thing, if you will, was it? Because he had to have another event in his life for God to be able to fill him in the manner that he wanted to fill him. And what was that? The wrestling with Jesus himself, right? He had to wrestle. So God actually was forming and filling, really, in the fact that he deceived his father, ripped his brother off, and then he felt bad about it, right? The whole story with him laying his head on the rock and the ladder with angels ascending and descending and so forth. And he made a commitment. You see him there making a commitment to God. In fact, you even see tithing there because he says, look, I will commit the 10th, right? But you see that situation with Jacob. What about Joseph? Do you see a forming and a filling in the life of Joseph? I mean, Joseph had kind of a me problem. And you kind of get this more when you read Patriarchs and Prophets, but he was a little arrogant, wasn't he? He was, and you read that. He was a little full of himself. And God had to take him through something to form him, didn't he? Wow. Talk about a formation, to get sold into slavery and then falsely accused and thrown into jail. He had to form Joseph and then filled him with his spirit to take on this role as prime minister in Egypt. How about David? David, had a lifetime of that. We'll talk about that sometime. David didn't just have one boo-boo and that was it, this big boo-boo. David's whole life was like this. Just. How about Peter? I think of Peter, and I think Peter's one that we all can relate to. Peter had to go through that awful, awful denial, that failure. And it was that really helped form him so that God could fill him at Pentecost. I think this can be significant, and I challenge you to think about this idea of forming and filling and how God goes about that. Because you may you may find a blessing in that as you think about your own life or experience, or if you're dealing with someone else. And I'll just share a thought that I have had as I have pondered this way that God creates. And it hopefully can help me to be patient, not only with others, but also with my own life. And sometimes I wonder, we do, and I admit that, and particularly in this role as pastor, because you want to be the soul winner, right? And so it's so easy. You want to see these people filled. Let's fill them up. Yeah, right? Fill up the baptistry too, right? I want to fill them. But God may be doing a process of formation. He may be saying, you know what, I'm not quite ready to fill. And sometimes I believe that's also the case with each other, as we sit in pews with each other, as we serve on boards with each other, as we come to gospel jams together, as we worship together on Sabbath morning. God can be working in somebody's heart in a forming process, and we, for whatever reason, feel like we need to get in and fill, right? We need to fill. Sometimes I think about the whole undercover process for a police officer, right? If you have to go undercover, you go undercover and you're trying to get connected with these mob bosses and whatever, and then you're there, you're working, you're being very careful, being subtle, trying to gain confidence and do your thing so that you can get connected properly and get all the goods, right? And then some beat cop who just doesn't know anything, maybe some rookie, second day on the job, and he sees something taking place and he goes blustering in and arrests everybody, right? You're like, man, what do? You just ruined my whole undercover operation here. I wasn't there yet, and you just blew it up. I don't know. I've wondered. Can we be guilty of that in dealing with each other? That we want to blunder in when God's still working, trying to form. He's trying to get us formed. Because what did we hear Jesus say? If he pours new wine into an old wineskin, what happens? It kind of bursts it. If he tries to fill us with his Spirit when he hasn't gotten us formed yet, ready to receive that particular blessing of the Spirit, it might burst us. I don't know. I'm trying to grasp some of these spiritual realities, but I encourage you as you think about your own life, as you think about other people, and particularly the other people who rub your fur the wrong way. Maybe God's still forming. Maybe God's still forming. He's working to form. So that would be my challenge. That's my challenge to you, to remember that God creates. He takes what is unformed and what is unfilled, and he forms it, and then he fills it.